the House of Commons Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food. I will start with a few reminders. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format. The proceedings will be made available via the House of Commons website. Just so you are aware, the webcast will always show the person speaking rather than the entirety of the committee. Screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted.
I've called the first hour of this committee to focus on committee business. We have a number of motions that have been given notice, and as opposed to disrupting the proceedings of the studies that we've talked about and we are currently under review, I thought it would be best to be able to move forward and discuss the motions that are going to be put forward. So we have a little bit of committee business to do. I see Mr. McGregor. You would like to be able to move forward, so I will start with Mr. McGregor.
Thank you, Chair, and credit where credit is due. I appreciate you booking an hour of the committee's time today to make room for this. So, colleagues, I'm going to formally move the following motion that pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on profit-driven inflation in the grocery sector and the cost of groceries going up while large chains are making record profits, that the committee examine the record profits of large grocery chains and their CEOs in relation to employee wages and the cost of groceries in Canada, that the committee also examine the ability of large grocery chains leveraging their size to cut into the earnings of Canadian farmers, that the committee invite witnesses with specific knowledge on profit-driven inflation and affected stakeholders from the industry, including grocer CEOs, economists, unions and farmers or representative organizations, that no fewer than 6 meetings are set aside to hear from witnesses, that the committee report its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to the report. Mr. Chair, I won't take too much time, but I would like to spend just a few minutes outlining why I believe this motion is important. We are at a time when we are seeing excess profits in the corporate sector at a time of historically high inflation. We all know around this table that food is a core necessity. It is something that Canadian families see week in, week out. It's forcing them to make extremely difficult choices. If you look at the earnings that are publicly reported, you can see that from 2020 to 2022, Empire's net profits jumped up by 27.8%. For 2021 to 2022, Loblaw's net profits went up 17.2%. And Metro, in the same time period, their profits went up by 7.8%. This, I believe, because of our committee's jurisdiction, not only over agriculture but over agri-food. Yes, I know we mostly deal with the producer and processor side of it, but I also feel that we have a duty to the Canadian public to launch a parliamentary inquiry into this matter to be sure that the stranglehold that these 3 companies have on the Canadian market, because I think they do have over 80% of the market, is not negatively affecting the choices that Canadians have to make. We have had a number of economists on the record, Jim Stanford, the Canadians for Tax Fairness, who have all said that corporate profits are, to some extent, driving this inflationary practice. And we also know that on the other end that farmers have had their own problems with the grocery sector, processors and producers, which is why a grocery code of conduct, the talks are currently underway. And I'll end with this, Mr. Chair. Since last week, when my notice of motion became public, we received an email from an employee who wishes to remain anonymous. I'm not going to reveal his name or the company he works for, but I will read this into the record. He states that he is employed as a file maintenance clerk and that his duties require him to make sure, I'll just actually quote it, quote, "My duties require me to make sure that retail price adjustments sent down from corporate are properly represented at the store level on signage. I have noticed a worrying trend over the last year of large quantities of retail price increases being sent down on a weekly basis. However, cost increases on these items don't match increases of retail prices that are sent down." He goes on to say, "I have noticed a trend where retail prices consumers pay for products will increase and cost increases will come down months after the fact, if at all. Based on what I know of our systems at the store level, this means that the profit margins on saleable goods will increase for the company until a related cost brings it back down. Thus, prices consumers must pay are overinflated until costs align with the retail change. It goes on to say, I believe a federal probe into grocery store price increases should be supported in our Parliament. I'll end there, Mr. Speaker, and I hope I can garner the support of colleagues around the table to launch this inquiry and get answers that Canadian consumers need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. I know that having engaged with the colleagues around this table, I do believe that there'll be definitely some thoughts and maybe perhaps some amendments. I did see your hand first, Mr. Perron. I think you had waved to me, perhaps not. I know Mr. Barlow has also signaled, so I'll start with you, Mr. Perron, if you'd like to comment.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Mr. McGregor, for your motion. This topic is extremely important. But I have some questions on the formulation of the motion. I have some proposals, a draft that I gave to the clerk earlier. We can study it together once you have it, but until then, I would like to have my colleagues' impressions on a few things. So yes, inflation is a crisis. The prices in grocery stores increase faster than global inflation. So something's happening. I think we must investigate. But when we're talking about retail profits, etc., should it not be the industry committee that should study this? It's a question that I'm asking today. I have some changes that I would like to propose in order to support the motion, but this is the question that I would like to put to my colleagues. Is this committee the right forum to study prices in grocery stores? It's a very technical question, so I'm wondering what you think. Or would you like me to proceed with my proposals? Yes, it's a good idea, because colleagues will be able to answer your question when they intervene. Okay, this is the question that I was asking myself, but if I take Mr. McGregor's motion, and I spoke about this with Alistair earlier and with the members of the subcommittee, and so there's an English formulation that you have. It might be imperfect because I wrote it myself, but in French, that pursuant to Standing Order 108.2, the committee undertake a study on inflation. I would take away profit-driven because we haven't studied this issue yet, and so I think we have to be careful with the wording so that we don't come to certain conclusions before having done the study. So we might find out that it is profit-driven, but we don't know it for a fact, so I think that we should eliminate that. And I would also eliminate large chains and record. And now when we talk of the wages of employees and the salaries of CEOs. I'm not against the idea of studying that, but I'm wondering if this is the right study for it or if we should speak about this in another study. Because right now we're speaking about how businesses manage their employees' salaries or even CEOs' bonuses. And so we've read the news. We know that these CEOs are touching huge bonuses that don't always make sense. But I think it's going to take a lot of time to study these issues. And so I think I would eliminate that part. So that the committee also examine, instead of saying that they leverage their size to cut into the earnings of Canadian farmers and to say that we should do that. I don't think that we can come to this conclusion before completing this study. It's the same thing for the next sentence that has been eliminated. And so this is what I suggest, dear colleagues, up to you. Mr. Barlow.
Chair, and thanks, Mr. McGregor, for bringing this forward. I think this is a very important issue. Many of my concerns with the motion as it reads are quite similar to Mr. Perron. I am not opposed to supporting a study of this nature. I guess my concerns would be a few things. I do believe that there is a balancing act here between industry, finance. I believe this is being done at finance right now, or something similar. Then when we get into discussion of wages, CEO actions, I think we're talking about competition here, something, again, which I don't think is necessarily under our mandate. So I think if there's some ways that we can tighten this up, and I would concur with probably most of Mr. Perron's amendments. I think one other thing that we would like added, Mr. McGregor, if we get down that far, is something about increases in input costs and the impact that's having on groceries as well. We can have a more discussion on what this is having, the impact this is having at the farm gate and on farms, and the impacts that's having on grocery prices as well, not just further down the supply chain. I don't think I have much more to add other than, I understand where Mr. McGregor is going. I don't think I have a problem with that. I just have an issue in terms of what the mandate of our committee is, Agriculture and Agri-Food, and I get a little bit what Mr. McGregor is saying, but I think when we start going into some of the stuff about CEOs and the relation with wages for their staff, I think that's not really in our scope as this committee. And I do agree with Mr. Perron as well when we talk about profit-driven inflation and record profits. I think we're already assuming the outcome of the study before we've even started it. So I would much prefer to take some of that language out, and still I think the essence of that is still there. So in summary, I think if we were able to tighten this up and be more focused on the agriculture side, and I think we can still get to what Mr. McGregor is talking about. And I know he has an opposition day motion tabled tomorrow. Congratulations on that, Mr. McGregor. Thanks for more work for me. Yeah, apparently he's got a bee in his bonnet, which we'll talk about later. But I do think I understand where you're trying to go. I think we can get there. I just have some concerns with the scope of what the motion says in terms of what is under our mandate for the Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food to actually action items to which come from this study. Last thing I will mention, what we would like to see inserted in this, and I agree with Mr. McGregor, this is important, but obviously, where we stand with C234, I want to see C324 finished. So we would like to add in there that we start this study as soon as the clause by clause of 234 is finished.
Okay. Thank you for those reflections, Mr. Barlow. I do see Mr. Drouin's hand and then Mr. Turnbull afterwards. Pardon? Turnbull was before? Okay, my apologies. And then I see Mr. McGregor. So, Mr. Barlow, just thank you for those reflections. I hear the sub-amendment on 234. Perhaps that was the only actual added language. If you have something specific that you'd like to see, maybe I'll give you a moment to think about that. Or maybe Mr. McGregor might willfully try to adopt that into his own motion. But let's go to Mr. Turnbull and then Mr. Drouin.
Okay, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mr. McGregor, for bringing this at this time, which is great because it didn't disrupt some of our other meetings, which I appreciate very much, and the Chair for creating some time for committee business for this discussion. I think this is an important motion. I'm generally share your concern with the fact that I think you're quite rightly pointing to net profits of three major companies as your sort of evidence that indicates, this as an area for inquiry. Now, certainly there's some conversation that could be had about whether this is the best committee to study it. I think Canadians don't particularly care about that. I think what I think is that, our committee covers the agri-food industry. Certainly we've probably prioritized producers more in our work and some of the, supply chain that excludes retailers. But I don't see why that should necessarily exclude us from studying this, especially given that this topic is so important today with the cost of living being something that we're all talking about every day in the House of Commons. And, I certainly hear in my riding people are concerned about the rising cost of living. I think there's a tendency to look at the inflationary pressures globally and to talk about that divorced from some of the businesses that control a lot of the supply chain. And I think in this case, we're not talking about, you're talking about net profits. And net profits are excluding costs, excluding over and above the cost to operate a business. So I ran a business for many, many years and was the CEO of that company. And I know net profits were hard to come by. So those companies claiming those massive net profits is a concern at a time when obviously, Canadians are feeling those pressures. So I support the motion generally. I think in terms of wording, I think others have made some good suggestions. I appreciated Mr. Perron's suggestions. I also think there might be an opportunity to, look at the impact on farmers, but also to look at the supply chain in general. One of the concerns I've often had with our agri-food system is there is a lot of consolidation that's happened within the processing. Like the whole supply chain has been consolidated over many years. So that gives, more market share to fewer companies, thereby, having more influence on the market. And ultimately, the consumer at the end of the day stands to, feel, especially if those companies are claiming large net profits. I think we should all be concerned about that at a time like this. So, and I appreciated you reading the anonymous sort of statement there as well, because I've heard some similar things in my writing. So I appreciate that. I appreciate you bringing it forward. And I think we should study it. And I just suggest that perhaps we could look at the supply chain and the impact on farmers, which I think coincides with some of the other comments that were made. So I'll stop there, but thanks.
Mr. Join.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what Mr. Turnbull has just said. The only thing with regards to what Mr. Barlow had said, I don't know if input costs actually have an impact on the price of food. And the only reason why I say this is we've heard time and time again from farmers in terms of they are price takers. They don't necessarily choose the price of grains that they sell. This is determined on markets worldwide. So that's the only thing I would say. And there might be an opportunity to address some of those issues with the current study that we will have input providers in less than an hour here. And those are some of the questions that we can ask them. So I just don't want to dilute this particular study because the agri-food sector is fairly large. And that would be the only caution, but it's not a hill I'm going to die on. And if we can all agree on something, then I think there's a way that we can move forward on this.
So I will go to Mr. McGregor, but just before I do, procedurally, Mr. Parent, I believe, has signaled his intention to move an amendment, and he has distributed those copies. Mr. Barlow, at least verbally, has moved what I would be seen as a sub-amendment. Certainly the language, just something to the effect that this study wouldn't take place until after 234 was reported back to the House. Mr. McGregor, you've heard some of the comments of the Liberal colleagues on the bench. Technically, we would have to actually vote back up towards the motion, and if my Liberal colleagues here to my right would like to actually move a motion or actually move something of a language change in what Mr. McGregor has proposed, that would ultimately be the time to do it. But why don't we hear from Mr. McGregor about his thoughts on what he's heard so far?
Yeah, so I guess I'll address the comments in the order that I heard them. I understand the concerns about whether or not this particular issue belongs at the industry committee and whether the language should be tightened up a bit more. I would argue no. I think that this committee in other studies has dealt with things like, the grocer code of conduct that has come up repeatedly. You could argue that belongs at the industry committee. We have heard from witnesses like the Retail Council of Canada. We've heard from many organizations that represent grocers. They have appeared here. I think our committee's mandate is to follow food from the farm to the factory to the fork. And if Canadians are having trouble accessing healthy, nutritious food because of the cost, that means something in our system is broken. Now, I've read into the record an email. I'm keeping it anonymous because the person who wrote us said they fear reprisal if their name becomes public. So I'm not going to read their name into the record, but I can tell you it's a real email. We have someone from in the House confirming what I'm alleging. We have a correlation between record net profits and high food prices for consumers. Yes, costs are going up across the line, but grocers are still able to make a high profit above and beyond those high costs. And I know, I have the benefit of having in-laws that live in Australia. Australia's food market is dominated by two chains. And they had news stories in previous years where those food chains would announce the price that they would buy carrots at, for example. And it was up to the farmers to try and match that price. So, just total cutthroat business tactics. And it goes to that point of farmers being price takers. They don't always have the option. They have to try and compete at the price that the grocer sets. So I would argue that this very much is within the mandate of our committee. I agree with Mr. Turnbull. I don't think Canadians much care about specific mandates of committees. That aside, I do think we do have a proper mandate here, but what Canadians care about is what they're seeing week in, week out, and I think they need to see their parliamentarians respond to those very real concerns. On Mr. Barlow's suggestion, I agree on C234. I think this is an important motion, but I know my Conservative colleagues have been waiting for a while on C234, so I will agree with not upsetting the current order of things. But as soon as that bill completes its journey here, I would like to see our committee embark on this study.
Okay. Mr. Drouin and then Mr. Perron.
Yeah, just to understand clearly, Mr. McGregor, what you're proposing is we finish C2. So the subcommittee that we just adopted last week, we toss that aside and we prioritize C234. And then we move on to your the study that you're suggesting, should it be adopted today, after 234. Yeah.
I'm not sure. I think what Mr. Barlow wanted was just not having C234 interrupted. So I don't know if he had any more specificity beyond that. I'm going to agree with him on that point. I won't interrupt its current proceedings before our committee.
Yeah. And I'm willing to make a little bit more concession here to Mr. McGregor to get this going faster if we can. And I know the chair is very passionate about the food security study, which I think we all are. But I honestly don't believe that we need a bunch more meetings on 234. We've did it last Parliament. We're going through the same witnesses, same testimony again. I think we could have one or two more meetings max on 234. We've gone down this road before, and then get yours to the table. It's not that I don't trust everybody here. It's not decisions made by this group necessarily. It's sometimes made above us. So I would like that amendment in your motion that study begins after a clause by clause on 234, just so I feel comfortable that we vote to support your motion, that I know we're covered as well. And so I guess if we would also agree that we only need a couple more meetings on 234 at the most.
Mr. Drouin, I appreciate Mr. Perron. I have Mr. Perron.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chair. There are quite a few things, so let me try to gather up the different components to make sure I followed the development. C234, I agree. I think we've done studies. We're redoing them. I think we can solve this. I agree completely with Mr. Barlow on this. I just want to make sure now, Ryan, regarding the amendment proposal, first of all, I wanted to make sure that Alistair was comfortable with the changes. This proposal is flexible here. Ryan, I think I understood that you wanted to keep at the beginning of the wording, you wanted to keep inflation due to inflation, profit-driven inflation, whether we're keeping that. And globally, few people said anything regarding that line that I highlighted in color. Are we keeping this part or not?
I want to help facilitate here. I think Mr. Barlow made it very clear that, at least as far as I know, the Conservative position was not against any of the amendments that Mr. Perron had brought forward. I don't know if Mr. Turnbull or Mr. Drouin would like to speak on whether or not you, on the Liberal side, have any issue with what Mr. Perron has suggested for amendments to Mr. McGregor's original motion. And then I think we can start to clean this up. We can start to vote on the sub-amendment, the amendment, and go from there. Any comment from this side of the room? Mr. Turnbull.
Yeah, I think so. I've reviewed the proposed amendments from Mr. Perron. I don't have a huge problem with any of them. There's one word in English that may not be translated. It says "with the producers and transformers." I think it should be processors, perhaps. But other than that, I think that the gist of or the sort of spirit of the motion is still there, even if you eliminate the word record profits, record, and just keep the word profits. I think it's there. I think the supply chain is already included, so I don't particularly see any problems. I note that there's one change to it which reduces the number of meetings. So I don't know if Mr. McGregor has see any challenges with that. It says no fewer than 6 meetings in the original motion that Mr. McGregor moved. Mr. Perron, I think in your version it says no fewer than 4. I mean, we're only specifying the number of the minimum, yeah. So it's not
Mr.
really
Turnbull,
a problem.
I'm just going to stop you there. This is, pardon my rookiness in the chair here. We should probably stay on Mr. Barlow's sub-amendment. So Mr. McGregor has given his thoughts on that, and I'm gonna open up the comments for Mr. Barlow's suggestion that this particular study would start after the last clause by clause and was reported back to the House on C234. That's essentially, Mr. Barlow, what you've moved. Let's focus on that, and then I apologize, Mr. Turnbull, I stirred you a little bit wrong, and then we'll go back to Mr. Perron's.
Barlow's sub-amendment. Okay, so I may differ in opinion in terms of C234 in terms of the number of meetings that we need, but I do think that keeping the sequence. What I wanted to do though is just ask, because we're sort of disregarding the subcommittee's agreement on the top 3 priorities. So I think what we're saying is that, because what we've been doing is mixing meetings and having one on world food insecurity, one on C234. We said we'd do both of those before we moved on to agriculture and the environment. That's what our agreement was. So now this is a new motion coming forward. I get that, there's a pressing nature in terms of, I think, what the public, should be expecting us to look at. So I get that it may interrupt that to some degree. But what I want clarification on is, are we just talking about doing C234 and then moving to this motion now, or are we still finishing the study on food insecurity?
I'll turn to Mr. Barlow. I don't think there was any mention about dropping the global food security study. I think, as Mr. Barlow had highlighted, it would be once 234 is done, then Mr. McGregor's proposed study could move forward, but not until such time that the clause by clause was done on 234. Am I correct in saying that, Mr. Barlow?
Yep, you are correct. I could, as part of the, it's fairly simple wording, but if it makes Mr. McGregor or Mr. I guess my concern, Mr. Turnbull, would be we could keep adding meetings to 234 and just drag that out longer. Obviously, I don't believe we need to do that. I could put, as in my amendment, Mr. McGregor, like a limit of 2 more meetings on 234 or 3. If there's to put a time limit on that they can't. And I don't mean this again. This is not to you guys across the way. that the powers that be do not try and drag this out and then further delaying what you're trying to achieve here. So I am more than willing to add that into that amendment as well if there's support amongst the floor to do that, and just so we put some sort of timeline on it.
Just going to seek a little bit of procedural clarification from my. So, Mr. Barlow, at the end of the day, I think you've moved Mr. McGregor's study should start after the clause by clause of 234, whenever that happens. I take notice that you might have a concern about how long that process should continue, but I see that as independent, and that can be a conversation, frankly, for another day. The clerk, because it's kind of confusing two different motions in one, I think it's better just to say that you're saying that Mr. McGregor's motion proposed study would move after the clause by clause on 234. If you want to litigate how much longer we should study 234, I think we can take that up in another form after we're done your sub-amendment, if that works. Mr. Joy?
Can I propose we just suspend for 2 minutes so we can just huddle quickly so we don't have to sub-amendment our sub-amendment of the sub-amendments? And we'll come back with, I think we've got agreement. We'll just huddle, and we might remove all of our amendments and submit just one so everybody's in agreement. But we seem to be bobbing heads. It's just a matter, you're stuck with procedure, and we'll make life simpler for you. If that's okay, if everyone agrees. 2 minutes?
Yep, 2 minutes. Great. Adjourned. Colleagues, thank you. It was a little more than 2 minutes, but I appreciate everyone's participation. The way in which my understanding as your chair that this should work is that we are going to seek to get unanimous consent to withdraw the sub-amendment and the amendment, and we're going to allow Mr. McGregor to reread into the record what I think will satisfy everyone on this committee. So I'm going to seek unanimous consent for Mr. Barlow's sub-amendment to be removed. Okay. The amendment for Monsieur Parent to be removed. Great. Mr. McGregor, the floor is yours to be able to move in, to be able to read into the record, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to all colleagues for working through this. And I'm going to read it very slowly for the benefit of our interpreters. So it goes as follows, Mr. Chair. That pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake a study on inflation in the food supply chain and the cost of groceries going up, while large chains are making profits, that the committee examine the profits of large grocery chains in relation to employee wages and the cost of groceries in Canada, that the committee also examine the ability of large grocery chains to leverage their size to cut into the earnings of Canadian farmers, that the committee explore, that the committee explore in which the food supply chain can help reduce rising food costs, and that the committee invite witnesses with specific knowledge on inflation and affected stakeholders from the industry, including grocer and food supply chain executives, economists, unions, and farmers or representative organizations, that no fewer than 6 meetings are set aside to hear from witnesses, that the committee commence the study after clause by clause on Bill C-234 is complete, that the committee report its findings to the House, and that pursuant to Standing Order 109, the government table a comprehensive response to the report. Hope that's accurate.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. A couple little tiny words, but I think that was our wordsmithing offside. I don't think any key elements of the intent are missing, but I'll go to Monsieur Parent. I know you have a...
Bon, je vais essayer de faire ça assez rapidement.
Good, I'll try to go through this quickly. What I have to say is of importance, however. Now, we have suspended our committee just now to handle an issue quickly. I said yes, fine. We were working quickly. However, I would like us to remain vigilant. It took us a while. And I'd like it known why. Because I insisted on getting the text in French because the changes were being made to a text that I was putting forward. Theoretically, we should have taken the first and worked on that. I came in with a text in both official languages, English and French. I think that if I can make that effort, every other member in this committee can make the same effort if we want to be able to move forward. I would like to point out to the members of the committee that if this occurs again, you know that I'm very kind on this matter, but I will block our advances because we're under pressure. Our witnesses are here for a second hour, and we do need to vote on this to be able to move forward. But I do think it's important that I underscore this issue. That said, I asked for the text in French, and you gave me the text in French, so all's well this time. But another time, if people come in prepared ahead of time, it will work much better. I had mentioned 4 minimum meetings. I think that was accepted in our asides here. That would be the only change I would make to what we have just heard.
That's an amendment. Okay, so 4 meetings. Colleagues, I don't see any issue on that. Am I seeing any concerns? Mr. McGregor, no concerns? Okay. Okay. Okay, so let's move to vote on the motion Mr. McGregor presented as amended by Mr. Parent for 4 meetings. We're all in favor. Okay, great. Are you happy? I'm looking to my procedural clerk. As long as she's happy, I'm happy. Okay. Passed. We are at time. I don't think there'll be too much issue with Monsieur Parent's. I'm going to let him read it into the record, and I think we can quickly move on from that as well.
Alors, que le comité
So the Standing Committee on Agriculture and Agri-Food set aside 2 of the meetings scheduled for the study on the environmental contribution of agriculture to study exclusively the problem of bee mortality, identify its causes, and make relevant recommendations to the government. That these meetings be deemed to be included in the main study on the environmental contribution of agriculture, and that the committee report to the House on this issue within the planned report on the environmental contribution of agriculture. And then we added after the winter break, because given everything else we've just decided to do, we won't be able to slip this in.
Okay.
L'amendement et ensuite on vote sur la motion complète.
Okay.
Someone to amend, we vote on the amendment and then go to the motion. Could I amend it myself? Yes, you can. Very well done. Terrific.
Yeah. Great. Okay. Mr. Falk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to point out I am in agreement with the motion that we just passed that was wordsmithed as a group. I'm in full agreement with that, and I think what you allowed earlier in the meeting was a anonymous email to be read into the record. And we for fear of reprisal, and I understand that. I get that. It's not lost on me, but we have witnesses around committee all the time when we do our studies, and many of them come here with fear of reprisal based on their testimony from either industry partners, suppliers, customers, whatever it may be. And I think I would just want to caution you, Chair, that you have allowed this today, that this does not become a precedent, that we allow anonymous, because I don't think that's the direction we want to go. We want witnesses to come here and to be able to put identity behind the information that's provided to committee.
I'll take it under advisement,
That's all I'm
Mr.
asking.
Falk. Appreciate that, and notwithstanding the testimony that was made, it's not my job to litigate whether or not it may or not be true. Ultimately, that be for the viewers that watch our proceedings to take note that it is anonymous, and that carries its own weight. I don't want to get caught up too long on this, Mr. McGregor. If it's very quick, or maybe you'll just have a pass. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to say, I was just using it to bolster my argument. If the person feels comfortable coming to a witness, I mean, we know parliamentary privilege protects whatever speech is given here. It cannot be used against the person when you testify before a parliamentary committee. So maybe that person will have a change of heart. But during the course of the study, of course, we want people to be here present with their full names and a full airing of this issue. So I agree with you on that.
And I appreciate you raising it, Mr. Falk. Next time, if you have an issue, I would ask you to call point of order and raise it right at the moment if that was how you were feeling at the time. But I do appreciate the reflection. Colleagues, we have witnesses in the room, and I would like, with your permission, to change over and continue the global food security and get those witnesses ready to go. Okay? Great. Yes, we're going to suspend just for a moment to do so. Thank you. Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Monday, May 30th, 2022. The committee is resuming its study of global food insecurity, and I'd like to welcome our witnesses for our first panel. Joining us from CropLife Canada here in the room, we have Ian Affleck, who is the Vice President of Technology. Welcome, Mr. Affleck. And Dennis Prost, who is Vice President of Government Affairs. Welcome, Mr. Prost. No stranger, I should say, to this committee. From Nutrien, we have Mark Thompson, the Executive Vice President, Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer, and he's joining us by video conference. Welcome, Mr. Thompson. And from Solio Cooperative Group, we have Ghislain Gervais, who is the President, and Casper Castra, who is the Chief Executive Officer. And I know Monsieur Parent will want to know in terms of testing beforehand. Mr. Gervais was unable to test ahead of time, but does have the proper headset. We don't anticipate there'll be any problems. Otherwise, we both have our witnesses in the room, and Mr. Thompson completed his check. So we should be fine on all fronts. Okay, Monsieur Parent? Parfait. So to our witnesses, you have up to 5 minutes for opening remarks. I'm going to start with our fine folks from CropLife Canada. I'm going to turn it over to you for up to 5 minutes, and we'll go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, committee members. As I say, my name is Dennis Prost. I'm Vice President of Government Affairs for CropLife Canada. My colleague Ian Affleck, our Vice President of Plant Biotechnology, is with me. So the issue of global food insecurity is one that is of great concern to everyone across the value chain in Canadian agriculture and agri-food. We take our role in helping to feed a hungry world very seriously, and we're united by a belief that Canada has a moral responsibility to act now in the face of rising global food insecurity to do our part. In talking about solutions, we think it's also useful to gain some historical context on where we've come from. In 1962, when the world population was 4 billion, the United Nations estimated that 25% of the world's population was starving or malnourished. 60 years later, with the world population approaching 8 billion, the UN estimates that 9.9% of people are facing hunger. While the world population doubled, we have cut the number of people facing hunger by more than half. While that number is still too high, it's a remarkable achievement. The green revolution in modern agriculture, namely innovation and the farmers who embraced it and skillfully applied it, is what helped drive this success. In the Canadian context, today's Canadian farm can produce twice as much output as 50 years ago with the same total input. This astounding increase in productivity has been matched by improved sustainability. Total emissions from Canada's agriculture sector have been relatively stable for 20 years, resulting in a decrease of greenhouse gas emission intensity of 50% from 1997 to 2017. Compared to a 36% decrease for the economy as a whole in the same period. Due to the adoption of soil conservation practices, agricultural soils in Canada have been sequestering carbon for 20 years. Plant sciences innovation are helping farmers grow stronger, healthier crops across Canada. The data is clear in showing that pesticides and plant breeding innovations deliver many benefits to Canadian consumers and the environment. Canadian families save an average of $4,500 per year on food costs thanks to efficient, high-yield farming practices. Notwithstanding the gains we've discussed, though, Mr. Chair, we know that food insecurity has now started to rise again globally due to the pandemic, global conflicts, and climate change. The number of malnourished people may have risen by as much as 150 million people over the last 2 years. Many members of Parliament are seeing food insecurity at home as well. There's no magic wand or simple solution to these challenges, but we do believe strongly that modern agriculture and improved sustainable productivity growth can play a role in helping to address food insecurity here at home and abroad. We know that given the right tools, Canadian farmers and Canadian agri-food businesses can grow and export more. This, in turn, can make Canada more prosperous. The government-commissioned Barton report in 2017 talked about the untapped potential of Canadian agriculture. In a 2019 report, the Royal Bank of Canada stated that, with the correct skills mix, the agriculture sector could add another $11 billion to Canada's GDP and make the sector more productive than auto manufacturing and aerospace combined. Modern Canadian agriculture is more sustainable than it's ever been. We're producing more food on less land, using fewer inputs and less water per acre, and burning fewer fossil fuels. This is due to innovation and the farmers embracing it. There's an opportunity for us to step up and do more to address food insecurity, but we need the tools to do it. We need a regulatory climate that facilitates and rewards innovation, and makes Canada an agriculture technology hub. Our recommendations, Mr. Chair, would be the following. 1, focus on regulatory modernization as a tool to encourage innovation. Our industry needs a regulatory system that's prompt, predictable, and science-based. Politically motivated policy adventures and regulation on crop protection products or biotechnology would put Canadian farmers at a huge disadvantage globally. 2, promote and defend the sustainability of Canadian agriculture on the world stage. While we work towards continuous improvements, we would like to see Canada promote the sustainability success story of Canadian farmers on the world stage and ensure that it is recognized in all international forums and negotiations. Canada is a world leader in sustainable agriculture and can be a world leader in sustainable productivity growth. Finally, Mr. Chair, support exports by promoting science-based trade rules. We ask the government to better use international mechanisms and institutions to ensure science-based, predictable, and transparent trade rules for agriculture. A well-functioning trade system allows nations and regions to focus on the crops and products they produce more efficiently, thus helping to address food insecurity. Thank you, Mr. Chair. We look forward to any questions the committee might have.
Thank you, Mr. Prost. Right on time. We always like that. Mr. Thompson, over to you for up to 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the introduction, for the invitation to appear today. My name is Mark Thompson, and I'm Nutrien's Executive Vice President and Chief Strategy and Sustainability Officer. I'm joining you today from Saskatoon, and I'd like to honor our company's practice of acknowledging this is Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis. I'll start with a few words on Nutrien. Our company was created in 2018 through a merger between Agrium and Potash Corporation of Saskatchewan, previously 2 of Canada's leading agriculture and mining companies. We're now the world's largest provider and producer of crop inputs and services. Our global business spans 4 operating segments across 13 countries, including our retail division, also known as Nutrien Ag Solutions, and the manufacturing and mining of potash, nitrogen, and phosphate fertilizers. We have fertilizer production capacity of over 27 million tons, and our retail business serves over 500,000 growers around the world. We're headquartered here in Canada, and our operations here are extensive and growing. We operate 6 potash mines in Saskatchewan, 4 nitrogen manufacturing facilities in Alberta, and nearly 300 ag retail outlets, primarily across Western Canada. And this is in addition to our 2 corporate offices in Calgary and Saskatoon. On the issue at hand, food security is a global issue that affects all of us. With increasing concern over global food supplies, it makes Nutrien's purpose to safely and sustainably feed a growing world more important than ever. Nutrien plays a critical role in global food security by ensuring that farmers have the products, services, and technologies they need to sustainably increase food production. By some estimates, the use of fertilizers accounts for approximately 50% of global crop yields and is critical for growers to meet the continued growth in demand for food. We're taking action to help fill the gap for food and fertilizers caused in part by Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the resulting disruption to the production and trade of energy, fertilizers, grains, and oilseeds from this region. And while it's impossible for one company to offset these supply impacts alone, we're doing everything we can to meet our global customers' demands. In June, we announced we would safely accelerate the ramp up of potash production capability at our Saskatchewan mines to 18 million tons annually in several increments over the next 3 years. And in the past 2 years, more than 70% of additional global production brought online has come from Nutrien alone. I'd be remiss not to mention our ambitious plans to do all of this while also solving for the challenge of climate change. And when dealing in societal imperatives like food security and climate, we must think holistically, work collaboratively together, and can't simply choose one or the other. We must solve for both. That's why in 2021, we launched our Feeding the Future plan, which includes commitments to help reduce our carbon footprint while preserving and growing food production. Some of these commitments set to be achieved by 2030 include achieving at least a 30% reduction in Scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions intensity, while also investing in the transition to low carbon fertilizers and scaling up a comprehensive carbon program that empowers growers to accelerate climate-smart agriculture and soil carbon sequestration, where growers are rewarded for their efforts through the generation of carbon credits and assets. On this latter effort, we're in our 2nd year of piloting our carbon program, and we're now targeting 675,000 acres across North America, and interest from growers has been extremely encouraging. Nutrien's working directly with growers to build customized crop plans that reduce their carbon footprint. We assist in taking soil samples and baselines, providing products and technologies, verifying carbon performance, and we're paying growers directly for their participation, anticipating that we need to be ready to support growers in a compliance or voluntary offset market with a focus on scalable long-term viability. We're in regular communication with Environment and Climate Change Canada, as well as Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada on our learnings and findings, and communicating with provincial government stakeholders. Enabling Nutrien's carbon program and market-based offset systems are key to helping the federal government achieve its stated ambition of creating pathways to reduce nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer use. To be clear, based on the advanced practices and performance of growers in Canada relative to other global crop producing regions, reducing N2O emissions by 30% is extremely ambitious and presents significant risks if viewed in isolation from food production and security. However, through our joint efforts, we believe we can make significant progress. And to the point of today's discussion, we can help Canada tap into significant opportunity in agriculture to deliver on our nationally determined contributions while addressing domestic and global food security through increased crop production and build resilience for the future. So with that, I thank the Chair and members of Parliament for your time today, and I'm pleased to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thompson. I will now turn to Mr. Gervais for up to 5 minutes. Over to you.
Bonjour à tous.
Hello, Mr. President, Ms. Chair, Ms. Vice Chairs, ladies and gentlemen of the committee, good afternoon. Mr. Casper Castro, CEO of our Solio Agriculture Division, and myself, Ghislain Gerbet, President of Solio Groupe Coopératif, thank you for giving us the opportunity to speak to you today. I farm with my wife, son, and brother in Saint-Guillaume in Centre du Québec. Solio Groupe Coopératif has been in existence for 100 years and is the only pan-Canadian agricultural supply cooperative. We represent more than 123,000 members, agricultural producers and consumers, in 48 traditional and consumer agricultural cooperatives. We have more than 15,000 employees in our three divisions: Olimel, specializing in pork and poultry processing; BMR, Quebec's leading retailer of construction materials and hardware; and Solio Agriculture, which supplies farms. That's Mr. Castro's. Over to you, Mr. Castro, rather.
Canada to help them maximize their yields by specializing.
Excuse me, sorry, Mr. Castro. I apologize. I should have said this off the beginning. I've been advised by the clerk that if you can change your background from the blurry to a non-blurry background, apparently that has some impact on the sound. My apologies for the interruption. I've stopped the clock. I don't know if you know how to do that, but I'm being advised. Okay.
I think I just figured it out.
Okay. Over to you. My apologies.
My apologies. Thank you very much. So Solio Agriculture supports producers in Eastern Canada to help them maximize their yields by specializing in the marketing of agriculture inputs and value-added agronomic services. We are proud to have fulfilled our duty to ensure our producers were supplied with fertilizer this past spring and to avoid shortages despite the sanctions imposed on fertilizer coming from Russia. The prices, large volumes required, and logistical constraints are the reasons that traditionally explain why Eastern Canadian farmers purchase fertilizer from Russia. In Eastern Canada, we normally fill our warehouses before the St. Lawrence Seaway closes to ensure we have at least half of the quantities of nitrogen required to supply growers for the 10 or so days of spring planting. The other half, which represents more than 10 ships for us, then arrives in the spring just in time to keep up with the rate at which our warehouses are emptied during planting. This usual process calls for considerable collaboration and planning by producers and their suppliers in order to have the product available in the spring. However, because of the impacts of the war in Ukraine, some types of nitrogen are not currently available, and producers are having to adjust their plans accordingly. As a result, many are concerned about product availability and high prices and are delaying their orders. Consequently, without firm orders, we must review our supply strategy to avoid stockouts, knowing furthermore that our deadline is February to avoid food insecurity associated with a decrease in production. Mr. Gervais?
Producers need to be confident that the government will adequately support them through the large fluctuations in fertilizer costs. Otherwise, normal yields will decline. or farmers will switch crops, hurting both domestic production and Canadian exports. In the short to medium term, innovation and technology will not suffice to reduce the use of foreign fertilizers. The tariff makes it more expensive for Eastern producers to produce than their counterparts in other provinces or in the USA. We are calling for clear and consistent policies for the 2023 season so that we will not find ourselves in the same perilous situation we were in last March when the sanctions first came down. The federal government must lift the 35% tariff on Russian fertilizers. We have said that we understand and respect the sanctions imposed on Russia. However, given necessity, consideration should be given to lifting the sanctions on Russian fertilizers to ensure our food security and our ability to do our part to feed the world. The government should ensure a stable and predictable business environment for producers in the east of the country. Thank you again for your invitation, and we look forward to your questions.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Gervais and Mr. Castro. My plan is a simple one, colleagues. Of course, the first round will shortly begin, but I will also try to slip in a short second round if possible. Mr. Barlow, to you.
And as you said, I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Lehoux. I'm going to try and be as quick as I can as we have limited time today. Mr. Thompson from Nutrien, you mentioned that to try and reach this fertilizer emissions reduction target of 30% could have some significant risks. And as we talk about the importance of food production right now, we talk about food security, can you maybe expand on what some of those risks would be?
Thank you, Mr. Barlow, for the question. Yes, as was mentioned by myself and other panelists today, our view is that Canadian agricultural producers are already leading on the world stage in terms of production per unit of greenhouse gas emissions. And given the situation that we're in globally with tight supplies of crop commodities and tight supplies of fertilizers and strong demand for each, we're acutely aware that any further disruptions to these supply chains could result in further tightness in the supply chain, putting at risk food security to a greater degree. The war in Ukraine has exacerbated a situation that was already worsening over the past few years. Food security has been becoming more of an issue due to suboptimal production in North America and South America in 2021. And given the significance of Ukraine and Russia in production and exports of key global commodities, this situation has become much worse. And therefore, were we to impose a situation where fertilizers were cut arbitrarily without consideration of food security, we could see that balance tighten even further and put the world in dire need of food supplies. As I mentioned in my opening comments, many studies point to the fact that fertilizers account for up to 50% of global crop yields, and therefore they are of paramount importance. And our focus is on continuing to increase performance on a greenhouse gas intensity basis while also accounting for food production.
A minute left? Oh, yeah. Thanks very much. Appreciate that. And Mr. Prowse, as quickly as you can, I only got about a minute left before I want to split my time. Same kind of question. What would be the impact on commodities and our yields if we do this 30% emissions reduction and triple the carbon tax on April 1st?
Well, I'll let fertilizer answer fertilizer questions, but our concern is on access to innovation for crop protection products. And, on that, as discussed with many members of this committee, we're concerned about where the current PMRA transformation might be heading. And, we're concerned about a very broad, unfocused review of the Pest Control Products Act. It's creating a great degree of uncertainty in the sector. And, frankly, we're concerned that at the end of that road might lie, a lack of access to innovation for growers.
Thank you. I'm going to give the rest of my time to Mr. Lehoux.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. My question is for Mr. Gervais of the Solio Group. On the matter of, in your discussions with the government so far regarding 2023, you know that the orders come in the fall. What sort of reception or rather, what means will be taken to meet the needs of the seeding in 2023? Any idea based on your discussions with the department so far? Thank you for your question, Mr. Leroux. Given that it's a matter of operations and techniques, I'll turn this over to Mr. Castro. Yes, indeed, Mr. Chair, or member, rather, of the committee. We are now planning for the season to come. Of course, we need to go and source the product from other countries rather than using Russia. Russia, in the past, accounted for 60% and more of the volume used in Eastern Canada, but specifically for nitrogen, even higher, about 80% of the volume of nitrogen that was supplied by Russia. So right now, we're sourcing the product elsewhere, such as the Middle East, Africa, from Algeria, Trinidad, Tobago, and so forth. But it's not all that easy. I imagine that there's also an important rise in costs when you do that. Yes, that's right. And my next question is about the 35% tariff that was brought down last spring. We know that, having researched the matter, that there's a 34.1 million as of June 2022, which is currently in a fund, and we wonder how this fund will be used, where this money will go. Having discussed this with your members, I'm sure you have some ideas about what should happen to that money. Should it go back to farmers, given that they are the ones feeling the impact of the tariff? Well, I would say, Mr. Liu, that it's not up to us to make suggestions about what should be done with that 34 million. I think that that's really your area of business. It's up to you. But we are asking for farmers to be reimbursed. To your first question, I and Mr. Castro were in France on an economic mission last week, and we spoke a good deal with cooperatives over there, French cooperatives, their issues. There are a number of fertilizer plants that have closed down given the price of energy. So countries who used to buy from them are now trying to buy elsewhere in the world as well, which makes supply even more difficult to get hold of. Sorry, we're out of time. Thank you, Mr. Gervais. And now the floor is Mr. Drouin. You have 6 minutes, sir. Thank you very much, Chair. My first question is also for Solio. I've heard your opening comments, and I think you're suggesting that the committee asks for the removal of the 34% tariffs. When I spoke to farmers last December, there was a 100% rise in nitrogen, and that was not due to the war in Ukraine. It's due to a quick rise in prices even before the war. So there's the matter of these tariffs, but we can't give incentives to Canadian companies to continue to do business with Russia. And I think I've heard you recommend that these extra tariffs be removed. So what guarantees that Russia would be a reliable partner? We've seen what's gone on in the northern seas with the gas lines. Russia cannot be an appropriate partner for any of us in the short, medium, or even long term. So what is Solio doing to ensure that we do have supply of nitrogen? 40% of the nitrogen that used in Eastern Canada is imported, that I know. You will understand, Mr. Drouin, that an over 100% rise on the price, as well as the 35% tariff, is really adding to the price of fertilizer, and that is really affecting people in Eastern Canada. The 2023 season is looking really very complex, and we feel a good deal of anxiety already among farmers about supply of fertilizer for that upcoming season. Perhaps my colleague can add something. Yes, it's not something we could foresee, of course, the war in Ukraine. And we were using Russia for our supplies for those traditional reasons that the product was available, it was at a good price, so we could get it into Eastern Canada, and so on and so forth. So that's why we still need or would like to be able to get the product out of Russia. When the 500 was imposed, end of February, beginning of March, we had 6 ships, even 8, already lined up, paid for by agricultural producers on contract. So adding that 35% tariff really complexified all that. I get that, but 60% of the nitrogen that's imported into Canada to be used by Eastern Canada is not paying a 35% tariff. So what's happened such that the price went up by over 100% even before the war? You are working in supply chain. So what do you have to tell us in the committee? Why did it go up by 100%? Yes, we're focusing on the 35%, but now I want to talk about the 100%, which is a lot bigger and really takes a lot more money out of a farmer's pocket. Well, I could say that yes, the 100% compared to the prior year, over the prior year's price. Of course, fertilizer is sold on an open market, just like any other commodity. The values of commodities fluctuate, as others have said here. There was higher demand already. There was also capacity limitation caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. China was no longer exporting fertilizer for a long time. A number of factors played into that price rise on the free market before the war in Ukraine and before the 35% tariff was imposed. You also mentioned in your opening statement that you are working hard to find new suppliers, not Russia. Have you been able to speak to Canadian specialists of international trade in the Netherlands and Germany? We know that Morocco produces nitrogen, even the United States, to see whether production could be increased out of those sources. Have you interacted and talked to all the specialists? We have officers around the world, federal government. As I mentioned earlier, Mr. Castro was in France last week, and he is now right now in Europe, France and elsewhere. Plants are not producing due to the cost of energy, which really complicates the competition for what little source supply there is from other countries. Perhaps, Mr. Castro, yes, there is a limited supply capacity right now. Numbers of cubic meters of nitrogen coming out of the European Union are not being produced right now. So as has been said, these countries are now importing nitrogen rather than exporting it. So that's another complicating factor. I'm sorry to break in. I've got only 30 seconds left. Have you had conversations with any country producing nitrogen in Africa? Yes, we are doing business with a number of African countries, including Algeria and Egypt. Taking into consideration that Russia did not cover 100% of our needs in the past, we already have good contact with a number of other countries around the world. 30-second now, actually. I'll cede it. Thank you. Mr. Perron, you have 6 minutes, sir. Yes, thank you, Chair. And thank you to the witnesses for having joined us here today. Mr. Gervais, perhaps to wind up what we were saying there, Mr. Gervais or Mr. Castra, all said and done, lesser production of fertilizer around the world, what will that lead to? What do you see as the main problems in the supply chain? If I've understood correctly, based on Mr. Drouin's recent conversation with you, there are supply problems elsewhere in Europe than even in Africa. So will supply be renewed? Will our producers get their fertilizers? Mr. Castro. Yes, there are certain types of nitrogen, some products which are not available, at least not as available as others. So urea, for example. There's a lot of production around the world of that, meaning that we've got more possibilities as to where we get it, where do we source it. Other types of nitrogen, though, nitrate-based, for example, in particular the liquid versions, are not as available. So then we do observe a transition to the more available products, urea-based, for example. That's one of the effects we're seeing, yes, in the supply chain, given the situation. All right, very good. So just picking up on what was said earlier, Mr. Gervais, you were saying, all said and done, that you expect producers to get some sort of support in order to be able to obtain their fertilizers, but you didn't specify exactly what they should be getting. Well, I think we said that we want to have that tariff removed, the tariff we've had to pay since the spring to buy our fertilizer. That was fertilizer that was ordered in February, for example, so we had to really skate to get the stuff in at prices that could be sold and so on. We've paid the tariffs, of course, to be able to access that fertilizer, but it's really the farmers that wind up paying for it. Unfortunately, only those in Eastern Canada. That's why we're asking for that amount to be reimbursed. Okay, for orders that had already gone in. All right, so that's what I thought I heard. Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Affleck or Mr. Prowse? When it comes to crop life, food security, you say it must be based on the best science, organized with proper regulations, but of course, adequate information provided to the public about the science behind it all, and promoting sustainability as well. You do mention the environment, and supporting it all with regulations that are sound, science-based. All right. So one of the problems we do have in this sector is agricultural waste. A good deal of agricultural production does not make it to the plate and could go to people who do need that food. So I'd like to know what you're doing in your company to deal with this. What are your policies to handle this issue? Thank you for the question.
With crop inputs, we talked about fertilizer, but when you look at seed varieties that are more hardy and more resistant to deteriorating in the field, and also crop protection products which avoid damage to those crops so that they do store well, we don't see them either rotting in storage or in the field before they even have a chance to arrive to the plate. That's where these technologies are so important if we're going to avoid food waste. And I think to that point, the regulations which you speak of are incredibly important. And Canada is a science-based regulatory role model for the world. And what we do here reverberates around the world, can either support or hinder food security. With that in mind, when there's public questions or concerns, especially with pesticides or GMOs or gene editing, it's important that we continue the government's work on this and not pause the work. We have to double down on engagement with the public and explanation of science-based regulation rather than pausing the work. I'll give two very quick examples of this where I think we've done well and maybe not so well as a government. Last week, Health Canada published an excellent response in the Hill Times to misinformation around their recent policies on gene editing. An excellent defense of a science-based regulatory system and demonstrating what the truth behind that science was and why they chose that direction. In contrast to that, I would say last summer the government paused the activities on pesticide maximum residue limit adjustment and review in the face of public questions and considerations on that, and completely understandable that people have questions. But pausing internationally aligned science-based work in order to figure out how to respond to the public just jeopardizes a science-based system. It confuses our trading partners, by which these MRLs create an ability for us to move our Canadian produce into areas of food insecurity. So I think a great example in the Hill Times of defending a science-based process and moving forward, and an unfortunate pause on MRLs on the other side, which creates a confusing message. So I really think it's important that public engagement, communication, and risk understanding is critical versus a pause in activity.
Sorry to break into that, Mr. Affleck. I just haven't much time left. We understand, of course, that it's important to communicate openly with the public, ensure transparency. That's the message that we all need to get. Mr. Thompson, you're speaking of supporting the export market. What can the government do more? I'm thinking of a standard reciprocity, for example. Are we importing products that don't meet our standards, perhaps? And I know you haven't much time to answer.
Thank you to the member. What I would say is agriculture is a globally competitive and globally traded market. And for fertilizers like nitrogen, which has been talked about, North America is a net import market. And therefore, supplies find their way where they're needed in the world based on lowest cost of production. And Canada is a competitive producer today and serves domestic needs, but also serves international market needs where it makes sense to do based on market factors.
Okay, merci, Monsieur Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Perron. Now, Mr. McGregor has 6 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here and joining us today and helping us with our study. I'd like to start with crop life. We are just seeing some pretty crazy weather patterns happen these years, and we know that climate change is going to drive that further and further. My own riding of Couch and Malahat Langford is going through a drought right now, and drought is not synonymous with Vancouver Island in October. British Columbia last year, we went from wildfires to catastrophic floods in a matter of months, and we know in the prairies they have had their own experiences. So it's just getting harder and harder for farmers to predict what is going to come their way, and they're already dealing with a lot. I guess we're putting so much pressure on farmers, right? We are setting these goals, these export goals. We know they are leaders in innovation. They have taken gigantic strides in producing more food with less land, and I think you very clearly outlined. But at the same time, they are fighting this rearguard action against climate change, and it's coming up unexpectedly. And I guess what I'd like from you is, because I think you cannot separate food security from climate change and the effects it's having on our land and our ability to produce food. Can our pace of technology can technological advances keep pace with the change that is coming our way? Developments in hardier crops, their ability to withstand these crazy weather patterns. If you have anything you can add to our discussion in that specific area.
Yeah, I think there's absolute opportunity for that to occur. And I think, again, Canada being a regulatory role model, its recent policies on plant breeding innovation to clarify how conventional crops are bred, whether it's and gene editing and GMOs, all provides opportunities for more hardier varieties that can withstand droughts or be more water efficient, more pest resistant, and that shortens the time by which it takes to get a new variety to market. It used to take 10 years in traditional breeding. If you can introduce gene editing, maybe you can get that down to 6 or 5, and that changes your ability to respond to weather patterns. So if we can get those varieties out to farmers for them to select what works best on their farm, they have a better chance of weathering the storm that could come their way. I'm from Prince Edward Island, and we don't have a drought. We had a very different situation, but whether it's my cousins who had barns blown down by that or the amount of rain that fell on the crops they're trying to harvest, it's the same issue. And I think there is a great opportunity for technology to address those issues. But if I come back to the regulatory piece of being a science-based regulatory leader, it's as much as we're able as a government to allow innovation to thrive. And it's we want safety first, but then it's how can we ensure safety with the least amount of impact on the speed of innovation. So always safety first, but then looking for the quickest route to get that innovation to market in the safest way possible.
And I guess I would just add very quickly, how do we make Canada an innovation hub? How do we attract that investment and have it happen in Canada? To your point, climate change is going to drive a great deal of research and development in agriculture. We think it should be taking place in Canada. We have the advantages, we have the ability to do it, but it won't happen on its own.
Yeah. Very good points. And I think, it's not only Canadian agricultural products, but also Canadian know-how and expertise in this field. And that's a great segue to my next question. So many countries in the Horn of Africa are going through famine-like conditions right now, and so many countries that depended on Ukrainian grain. That stop in Ukrainian exports really affected many, many countries in a horrible way. It truly is a breadbasket for the region. And, while exports are resuming, it just shows that, the vulnerability of supply chains to geopolitical incidents and conflict. We've had witnesses say that Canada could also be doing more to try and establish better resiliency in those countries, better know-how, so that those farmers have the ability to withstand the ravages of supply chain interruptions, climate change. We know that's having a big effect on the Horn of Africa as well. Do you have any comments on how that Canadian know-how and expertise, from your perspective, could be exported to those countries to help build that resiliency there?
I don't know if Ian has some thoughts, but one of the things we talked about in our opening remarks was just Canada, promoting our resilient agriculture and taking that technology out there. We are a sustainable supplier. I believe that Canada, we have about 8% of our greenhouse gases are generated by agriculture and agri-food. Globally, that number is 23%. So we do have efficient systems, and we can do a great deal to export that, and we would very much like to see that, and of course to have those countries growing crops that are culturally and locally appropriate, and I think we can play a role in doing that.
Mr. Thompson from Nutrien, I only have 30 seconds just on the two questions. Did you have any thoughts you wanted to add to that?
I would say it's to the member, it's the two things that I referenced in my prepared remarks that we're doing to respond. I think one, increasing the availability of fertilizer production globally for export to ensure that countries that need fertilizer the most significantly are not left without that. And then second, our retail business operates in 7 jurisdictions that are producing the same crops that have been left in short supply because of the crisis in Russia and Ukraine. And the most that we can do in that business is helping growers increase productivity and yields in other geographies to ensure that the food crisis is as muted as it can be by making up that shortfall.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Thank you, Mr. Thompson. Now, colleagues, we were a little bit late starting because of our committee business. We are going to go to a second round, but it's going to be a little bit tighter. I'm going to do about 3 minutes for the Conservatives, 3 minutes for the Liberals, about 2 minutes for the NDP in block. So, Mr. Falk, I'm going to turn to you for... Oh, we're going to start with John for about 3 minutes. John.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have one quick question, maybe to Ian or Dennis. Is there any work been done on what the impact on yields? Like, we're talking about food production and food security here. If we reduce fertilizer emissions by 30% from where we are now, what would be the impact on commodities and yields? Do we know?
Mr. Barlow, I don't have any direct on fertilizer. We have, however, commissioned a team of economists when we looked at our area, which is of course crop protection products and biotechnology. And if you took those away, you would raise the food prices of Canadians by $4,500 a year. So we staying in our lane. I mean, that's $4,500. That's a massive impact, and it would also require more land and more inputs. But so I'll let fertilizer speak to their area, but I can tell you that on crop protection products and biotech, it was a team of economists estimated at $4,500 per year.
Thanks, Mark. Mr. Thompson, would you have any data on that?
Sure, Mr. Barlow. Thank you for the question. I repeat the comment that I made in my prepared remarks that today, by some estimates, fertilizer accounts for 50% of global crop yields. And so at the levels of reduction that you're talking about, we would expect that if that were sustained on a permanent basis, we would see significant impact on global crop production. And our strategy is really to help growers continue to find ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in farming and sequester more carbon in soils without sacrificing productivity. And our carbon program is one of the ways that we're doing that by helping growers with conservation practices like no-till farming and cover cropping, as well as practices that reduce N2O emissions on the field, like use of enhanced efficiency fertilizers, nitrogen inhibitors, variable rate scripting, all of which have been shown to reduce emissions without sacrificing productivity. And so, as I said in my comments, cutting fertilizer straight away is just not a viable option, and we've got to solve for both of these issues.
Mr. Falk, you have about just over a minute if you want to ask a quick question.
Mr. Thompson, I'd like to follow up a little bit on that. You're a global company and you operate around the world. What jurisdiction do you see the most opportunity to meet the growing food demand?
Well, first, I think in the spirit of today's conversation, we see Canada in an extremely advantageous position, and I think Nutrien's a great example of that. Canada has an ability with the right regulatory framework and attraction of investment to increase fertilizer production, and we're doing just that. But also, when you look at the crops that have been left in shortfall by the crisis in Ukraine, Russia and Ukraine accounted for about 20% of global exports of corn and canola, about 30% of wheat and barley, over 60% of sunflower oil. And when you look at what crops we have in Canada and our climate and mix, we're perfectly positioned to play a larger role on the world stage, and exports take up about 50% of our production. So in addition to other countries that can meet that shortfall, I would say that Canada has a very significant and important opportunity.
Okay, and just really...
Unfortunately, Mr. Falk, that we're at time and we're already a little bit pressed. But I know if you want to ask Mr. Thompson to send something in or something additional, I'm sure he'd be more than willing to do that in writing. I'm going to go to Mr. Lewis now for about 3 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you all the panelists for being here. Very much appreciate this. Maybe I'd continue the conversation with Mr. Thompson. It's important to hear that we can have those conservation practices that you mentioned. We can reduce emissions without sacrificing productivity, and that's one of the reasons we're having this study. One of the things you did mention in your opening statement was you talked about verifying carbon performances. Can you expand on that? What did you mean by how we can help verifying carbon performance and see how we can measure the progress that our farmers are doing and help to reward them for that?
Yes, thank you to the member for the question. So in our carbon program that I referenced today with Nutrien, we're looking at two pathways to reduce emissions in the field. One is creating more removals, which is sequestering more carbon in soils through practices that I mentioned, like cover cropping and no-till, and then reducing nitrous oxide emissions from the application of fertilizers, which again can be achieved through practices like enhanced efficiency fertilizers, inhibitors, variable rate prescriptions in terms of how we use fertilizer in the field. And so part of our program today involves rigorous soil testing to start the program, and that's to establish a carbon baseline. Nutrien owns the largest U.S. soil sampling company, and that's given us capabilities to support growers in this effort so that any outcomes that we have in the program are science-based and verifiable. So that was what I meant when I made that comment. I think second, we do have modeling, albeit historical and probably not up to date for today's practices, which Nutrien is working with industry partners to modernize in terms of today's practices that are used by Canadian farmers as an example, and what we can expect in terms of nitrous oxide emissions in the field. So we're creating baselines and performance measures for both of those things so that we understand that when we implement these practices, what type of performance gains we're getting. And we do see those from the early stages of our carbon pilots.
And that's important. It's important to know that the farmers want to be part of the solution, but they also want to make sure it's accessible to them on the ground. And so I appreciate you working on that. You also mentioned market-based offset systems. Is that talking about selling the carbon sequestration and having companies be a part of the solution?
That's correct. So above all else, for growers to adopt these practices at scale, there will need to be an economic incentive. And to achieve some of the outcomes that I've talked about, there is an investment required and there is a cost. And so in our carbon program, we've not yet waited for the moment for these voluntary markets or compliance markets to reach scale. Nutrien has believed over the past few years that we've got to take action now to put that infrastructure in place. So on the basis of our performance measurement and baselining, we're actually paying growers for their carbon performance in these pilots to create that economic incentive for practice adoption. Now, for this to happen at a larger scale than we're working on it today, we'll need partners and policymakers from across the ecosystem to come together and align on a set of hopefully universal standards that will allow this program to flourish. And the market-based incentive will certainly be a part of that. And to the extent that that's there, growers make economic-based decisions and they care about sustainability, and we will see those programs flourish if that incentive is there.
Merci, Monsieur Thompson. Monsieur Louis.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson and Mr. Louis. Now, Mr. Perron, you have 2 minutes. The floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Thompson, just to pick up on that, when you say that we need to set up some sort of support there, do you expect that good behavior or good practices that support the environment should be funded, should be encouraged with money incentives?
Economic incentive that compensates growers for the performance in the field, whether that's to sequester carbon or reduce greenhouse gas emissions through the form of a carbon asset or a carbon credit, is an appropriate and needed incentive to scale up those practices. And when we talk to industry partners from other industries outside of agriculture, there is a growing demand for carbon offsets, and we believe that agriculture can be a meaningful part of that equation. So really what we're talking about is providing the right economic incentives for growers to adopt these practices, create those carbon assets or carbon offsets that are going to be in need in a decarbonizing economy. And we expect that as that market takes shape, there will be value placed on those practices. We do believe that the off-CAF program, the On-Farm Climate Action Fund that's been set up, is a good measure to provide an initial incentive for adoption of these types of practices so that growers can begin working on this today.
Okay, merci.
Thank you. Mr. Charvet. On the same topic, you spoke earlier of your rising costs. Do you have any other suggestions to make about support for innovation for the environment? 30 seconds, please. Yes, of course, innovation support programs are always appreciated by growers. Growers have always wanted to use new technology. They're always on the forefront when it comes to reducing costs and also reducing the environmental imprint of their work. Agriculture does emit greenhouse gases and contributes to climate change, but of course is affected by climate change, so we must do everything possible to reverse the trend. Thank you very much, Mr. Gervais, Mr. Perron, and now Mr. Gregor, you have 2 minutes. You have the floor.
Mr. Chair, the fertilizer issue is getting a lot of airplay in the news these days. I personally think it's a laudable goal to try and find ways to reduce our emissions from fertilizer. I think if you had two farmers with the same amount of fertilizer, you could get two different emissions results based on how they apply that same amount of fertilizer. So it's not about reducing the amount of fertilizer. I think it's about getting smart in how it's applied and how it's used. I also know a lot of farmers are leading the way in reducing their own fertilizer use. They are employing regenerative methods. They are paying attention to that important symbiotic relationship between plants and the microbiology in the soil. So there is a way of doing this. There's a way of having an adult conversation about this, and it will also serve to reduce farmers' input costs ultimately. I'm just wondering, like, in terms of selecting varieties of crops that can grow under conditions of less fertilizer use, paying attention to that microbiology, that important symbiotic relationship in the soil food web, is anything that CropLife can tell us about that important work that's being done?
Yeah, I think there's some really exciting discoveries on the horizon. There was recently the government of Saskatchewan invested $300,000 with the Global Institute for Food Security in nitrogen-efficient wheat. So this is a wheat variety that would be able to produce similar yields or greater yields while using less nitrogen. And that's not a focus on demonizing nitrogen. It's saying this is a way to tailor those plans together with the variety to hit the optimal levels. And I think even in regular varieties that we have now, they all go through trials where you look to see what the optimal level of fertilizer. And growing up on a farm, my dad never wanted to put an ounce of fertilizer on the ground that he didn't have to. They're looking to minimize inputs in every space, whether it's seed, water, fertilizer, pesticides. You're always trying to grow the most on the least with the least. And I think innovations like nitrogen-efficient wheat and other varieties that can do similar things will be very beneficial to agriculture in the future.
Thank you, Mr. McGregor. Colleagues, I don't do it often, but you know I used to love taking questions when I was not your chair. And so if you'll indulge me just for about 90 seconds, I'm going to ask Mr. Thompson two quick ones. Mr. Thompson, can you explain to this committee, obviously the war in Ukraine has, I presume, created trade disruptions about the patterns. We've heard that actually from Solio a little bit today. Can you give this committee a bit of a sense of who might still be buying Russian and Belarusian inputs for the fertilizer process, or whether or not the war has had an impact in that domain, and where Canada, whether it be companies like Nutrien or otherwise, can try to help fill that gap, and what that gap actually is?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the question. So I think the most illustrative example of the war in Ukraine, specific with the fertilizers, I've already talked about the impact on grains and oilseeds, is in potash fertilizers. And so if you look at the market for potash globally, it's about 70 million tons, and Russia and Belarus account for about 40% of global trade in potash. And actually in 2021, before the war had broken out, Belarus had its own geopolitical issues as a result of actions it had taken that resulted in sanctions that severely disrupted supplies of Belarusian potash to the market. After the war broke out, what we saw was a combination of continued sanctions on Belarus, new sanctions on Russia, and logistics disruptions as a result of the war. And therefore, our view is that we will see that 70 million ton market and the supply available to that market reduced by roughly 8 to 10 million tons this year as a result of those disruptions. Certain Western nations and countries have elected not to purchase Russian or Belarusian fertilizers, but in the case of potash, we are still seeing purchases from countries like Brazil and India and China that continue to purchase those fertilizers. In the case of Nutrien, as I said in my opening comments, we've accounted for about 70% of the increase in global potash production alone in the last 2 years and have made a commitment to increase our production volumes by 3 million tons over the next 3 years. And we're the only producer globally that is in a position to do that. And we acted quickly because of this topic today, that we see a looming food security crisis and doing our part to make sure that growers have the potash that they need, notwithstanding the supply disruptions in the former Soviet Union.
Just one quick question for Eastern Canada. As a member of Parliament that sits in Nova Scotia, we were hearing the conversation about Canada's self-sufficiency in fertilizer in Western Canada versus Eastern Canada and the inputs that come in. Very quickly, is there a way to solve that? Is there a market-based solution that can help solidify Canada's, I'll say, self-sufficiency in fertilizer production east to west?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I mentioned in my earlier comments, we do view fertilizer and agricultural markets as extremely efficient, and we're proponents of a market that doesn't involve undue regulation that would cause distortion in what we view as otherwise very efficient markets. In the case of fertilizer supply coming from Western Canada, fertilizer pricing tends to be based off benchmarks plus transportation differentials. And in the case of Nutrien, we have a very loyal, longstanding customer base in proximity to our facilities who also have demand that we're serving. And therefore, if imports are coming into the North American market, they're coming in because it is advantageous and economically competitive for them to be there. And we believe that continued global trade of fertilizers is necessary to meet demand around the world.
Thank you very much, and thank you, colleagues, for the quick indulgence on the questions. That wraps up our panel and our session. I want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving and time back in your ridings, and we will see you back on the week of October 17th, I believe it is. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.